Imagine lending a family member thousands of dollars only for them to pretend you owed them. Well, I didn't just let it slide. I made sure everyone knew the truth. Family reunions were never my thing, but I showed up anyway. It was at my cousin Sarah's house, a warm suburban place in Raleigh, North Carolina. I wasn't thrilled about going, but I knew skipping it would just cause more drama. And I hated drama. Growing up, my family was never what you'd call functional. There was always some kind of tension, money problems, grudges, or just petty nonsense. I learned early on to keep my distance, but I still made appearances to keep the peace. Then there was Uncle Mike. Not the misunderstood, tragic kind of black sheep. Oh no. Mike was the type who left a trail of unpaid debts, failed business schemes, and endless excuses. He'd never kept a job for more than 6 months, always blaming someone else for his failures. And when things got tough, he turned to family, not for emotional support, but for money. I had worked my way up on my own, no handouts, no shortcuts. I juggled multiple jobs, took out student loans, and sacrificed years to build my career. But according to Uncle Mike, my success was the family's success. And now, apparently, I owed them. So there we were, eating our pot roast and mashed potatoes when Mike stood up, cleared his throat, and took center stage like he was about to deliver a presidential address. I sipped my iced tea, already bracing myself. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, drawing out the words for dramatic effect, "I want to talk about something very important, something that affects all of us." People quieted down. Some leaned in. I just sighed. "Family is about supporting each other," he went on. "It's about being there in times of need. And yet," he paused, turning directly to me, "some people here seem to have forgotten that." "Oh, here we go." He gestured toward me with a smug smile. "My dear nephew Jacob has done very well for himself. Big house, nice car, lavish vacations, and that's great. Really, it is. But what about the people who helped him get there? What about the family that sacrificed for him?" A few murmurs spread through the room. My mother rubbed her temples, already exhausted. "I've hit hard times," Mike continued, shaking his head. "And all I've asked for is a little help, a little generosity from someone who has more than enough. But instead, I've been ignored." His voice grew louder. "Left to struggle while my own blood lives in luxury." He paused, expecting an outcry, waiting for someone to pressure me into opening my wallet. But the room stayed silent. All eyes were on me. I let the quiet stretch for a few seconds before I stood up. I wasn't angry. If anything, I was amused. Because what Uncle Mike didn't know was I had come prepared. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and held it up. "That's real interesting, Mike," I said calmly. "Because if I owe you so much, then maybe you can explain this." His face lost all color. He knew exactly what I was holding. A legally binding loan agreement, signed by him. I unfolded the paper slowly, making sure everyone saw it. "This," I said, "is a contract Mike signed when I lent him $28,000 5 years ago. He swore he'd pay it back in 2. Not a single dime has been returned." A few people shifted uncomfortably. My cousin Mark whistled under his breath. My mother shook her head, unsurprised. "You never intended to pay me back, did you?" I asked, my voice sharper now. Mike's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Then, in desperation, he pointed a shaking finger at me. "Oh, don't act so high and mighty. Who do you think raised you? Who fed you? Who made sacrifices so you could go to school? You owe us, all of us." There it was. The real reason behind his speech. I took a deep breath and pulled out another piece of paper. "Okay, Mike, since we're talking about sacrifices, let's talk about the real one." I held it up. "Mom," I called, "do you remember this?" She squinted at the document, then let out a bitter chuckle. "Oh, I remember it, all right. This," I said, turning to the crowd, "is proof that when I was 18, I had to get a job on top of my studies because Uncle Mike drained my mom's savings account. $98,000 gone." Gasps rippled through the room. Mike flinched. That was a mistake," he stammered. "But you did it," I shot back. "And did you ever pay it back?" Silence. Then from the back of the room, a voice spoke up. "You know what?" My Aunt Linda stood up, fists clenched. "I wasn't going to say anything, but since we're talking about who owes who, let's talk about the money he stole from me." "Wait, what?" Mike's head snapped toward her. "Linda, what the hell are you talking about?" She glared at him. "You conned me." she hissed. After my husband passed, you convinced me to invest in your business opportunity. I gave you $215,000, Mike, my husband's life insurance, and you lost it all. People gasped. My stomach dropped. One by one, other family members started speaking up. My cousin Tyler muttered, I lent him $7,000 last year. Never saw a cent. I gave him $4,500, someone else said. Gone. I loaned him $10,000, another uncle admitted. A wave of murmurs spread as the family put the pieces together. Uncle Mike had drained us all, and now he was out of options. His face turned beet red. Okay, look. He held up his hands. I know things got out of hand, but I can fix this. I just need a little more time. I laughed. Are you seriously asking us for more money? Mike flinched. Then, without another word, he bolted, shoved past people, grabbed his coat, ran out the door, and just like that, he was gone. The family erupted into chaos. My mother was fuming. Linda was shaking with rage. My cousins were cursing under their breath. And me, I was done. We have enough proof to take him down, I said. Let's do it. One by one, family members nodded. And so we did. Lawsuits, fraud investigations, social media exposes. Within a month, Mike had lost everything, his apartment, his car, his reputation. And when he called my mom begging for help, she laughed. Not my problem, Mike. Then she hung up. And that was the most satisfying moment of all. In the weeks that followed, the family mobilized like never before. Aunt Linda was the first to act. She marched straight to her lawyer the next morning, armed with bank statements, emails, and texts from Mike promising her guaranteed returns. Her lawyer took one look at the paperwork and told her it was fraud, a criminal offense. That was just the beginning. I dug up my loan contract and filed a lawsuit against Mike for the $28,000 he owed me. My cousin Tyler did the same for his $7,000. Then my mom, my Uncle Ray, and even a distant cousin from Arizona, one by one, they all stepped forward, each with their own stories of being scammed. By the time we were done, Mike was facing multiple lawsuits and a fraud investigation. But we weren't stopping there. My cousin Sarah, a social media wizard, took it upon herself to make sure no one else fell for Mike's tricks. She gathered screenshots of his texts, proof of wire transfers, even the legal documents, and put together a post that laid everything out in brutal detail. She didn't tag Mike directly, but it didn't matter. The post spread fast. Within hours, people were sharing their own stories. A former landlord chimed in. Mike had skipped out on rent. A coworker from a failed job commented, Mike had borrowed $2,000 and never paid it back. Someone even found an old GoFundMe Mike had set up for a fake surgery. Turns out, Mike wasn't just scamming family. He'd been running this game for years. A few days later, word got back to us. Mike had fled town. He was staying with an old friend in Chattanooga, Tennessee, trying to lay low while everything blew over. But it was too late. His name was toxic. His reputation was ruined. Even the people who used to defend him had nothing to say now. And then, just when we thought we'd seen the last of him, my mom's phone rang. It was Mike. She let it go to voicemail. His message was pathetic. Please, he said, his voice shaking, just tell them to drop the lawsuits. I'll pay everyone back. I swear. I just need some time. Mom smirked. Oh, like how you promised Linda? Like how you promised all of us? She deleted the message. A week later, we got word that Linda's fraud case had gone through. The court ruled that Mike had to pay her back. Every last cent. But of course, he had no money, so the court did the only thing they could, garnished his wages. Every paycheck, every job, every cent he tried to earn, gone. He tried working under the table, but by then, his name was so ruined that no one wanted to take the risk. He was drowning, and this time, there was no one left to bail him out. A year passed. Life moved on. The lawsuits had done their job. Mike was completely broke. His car had been repossessed, his apartment evicted, his business ventures gone. He drifted between low-paying jobs, barely scraping by, hopping from one cheap motel to another. Meanwhile, the rest of us were doing just fine. Aunt Linda got her money back, little by little, with each paycheck Mike earned. I never saw my $28,000, but I didn't care. The real win was knowing he'd never pull another scam again. Then, one day I got a call. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. It was him. Jacob, it's me. His voice was weak, hoarse, like he hadn't slept in days. I know I screwed up. I know I messed up bad. But I don't have anywhere to go. Nobody will talk to me. I just need some help, man. Please. I listened to the message twice. Then I deleted it. A week later, Mom got a similar call. This time she answered. She told me about it later, how his voice cracked, how he sounded nothing like the arrogant man who once stood in that living room demanding money. He begged her, just a place to stay for a few days, just until I get back on my feet. Mom let him finish, let the silence hang in the air for a few long seconds. Then, in the calmest voice possible, she said, "Not my problem, Mike," and then she hung up. That was the last time we ever heard from him. Rumors spread over the next few months. Someone saw him sleeping in his car, someone else said he was couch surfing, another claimed he left the state entirely, but none of us cared. Mike had spent years feeding off the people who loved him, bleeding us dry with his lies and manipulations. Now, there was no one left to save him. And me? I was still successful, still thriving, still free. That was the best revenge of all. Life had a way of settling back into normalcy after the storm. A year had passed since Mike had burned every bridge, and honestly, none of us thought about him much anymore. He was just gone. No calls, no messages, no desperate attempts to crawl back, and it was better that way. Aunt Linda finally found peace, knowing that every paycheck he earned was being siphoned straight into her bank account. My mom, once the family's emotional crutch, no longer had to deal with his nonsense. And me, I was thriving. Work was going great. I just bought a vacation home in the Carolinas. And most importantly, I was free from the weight of someone else's failures. Then, one evening, I ran into my cousin Tyler at a bar downtown. We hadn't seen each other in months, so we caught up over a couple of beers. Eventually, the conversation drifted to Mike. "Did you hear?" Tyler asked, taking a sip of his drink. "He's living in some rundown motel out in Memphis, working odd jobs, barely scraping by." I raised an eyebrow. "Still alive, huh?" Tyler let out a dry chuckle. "Barely. Some guy from work told me he saw him outside a gas station last week. Said he looked rough and tired, like life had chewed him up and spit him out." He shook his head. "Honestly, he's exactly where he deserves to be." I nodded, taking a slow sip. He wasn't wrong. Mike had spent decades taking from others, assuming there would always be another safety net waiting. But in the end, there was no one left to catch him. Still, I didn't feel joy in hearing about his downfall. No satisfaction, just nothing. Maybe that was the real victory, because for years he had been a shadow over my life, always lurking, always scheming, always waiting for another handout. And now, he was nothing more than a ghost, a cautionary tale. Tyler leaned back in his chair. "Think he ever changes?" I thought about that for a moment. The thing about people like Mike, they don't change. Not really, not unless they're forced to. And even then, it's rarely enough. I set my drink down. Doesn't matter. And it didn't. Not anymore. We paid the tab and walked out into the cool night air. Somewhere miles away, Mike was probably staring at a stained motel ceiling, wondering where it all went wrong. But I wasn't going to waste another second thinking about him. I had a life to live, a damn good one. And for the first time in years, it was completely, utterly mine. Family should be about love, trust, and support, not manipulation, deceit, and endless handouts. Mike spent years taking from those who cared about him, believing he could always talk his way out of trouble. But eventually the lies catch up, the bridges burn, and when there's no one left to save you, you're left with nothing. This story isn't just about revenge. It's about boundaries. It's about standing up for yourself, refusing to be used, and understanding that not everyone who shares your blood deserves a place in your life. Some people will take until there's nothing left, and when they do, the best thing you can do is walk away. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, real-life lessons, because sometimes the best justice is simply moving on.